so happy we're alive.
Good evening, and welcome to Louisville Late Night. This evening we're in beautiful San Francisco, California, and we're just lucky as hell to have with us a real thinker and a terrific writer, Paul Armentano. Paul has been putting together information concerning the drug reform movement, and in particular the marijuana decriminalization movement, for years. He spends hundreds, thousands of hours combing through research papers, scientific information, propaganda, all kinds of information to pull together what's true and what's not true, and what's helpful and what's not helpful. It sounds like there's a siren going down out here in San Francisco. There goes the fire, the whatever it is, ambulance right now. But anyway, it's almost an emergency situation here in the country, Paul.
It sounds like Washington, D.C. outside.
That's where you usually hang out, right?
That's where our office is, yes.
With NORML?
Yes.
The NORML office. And what's your official role with NORML now?
Let's see. My official title would be Senior Policy Analyst.
Kind of like the Karl Rove of NORML?
I'd like to think so. Maybe not quite as effective. If that was the case, maybe the laws would be a little bit different. But I wouldn't say I'm as Machiavellian as he is, nor do I have as much flagrant disregard for the truth as he does. So I try to let the facts speak as they may, if you will.
Paul, do you mind telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to be involved in the decrim movement?
You know, I've been involved with NORML for about 10 years now, and sometimes I forget quite how I got involved. But this was always an issue I was passionate about, going back to when I was a teenager, in fact.
Where was this?
This would have been in New England. This would have been in Connecticut and Rhode Island. New England's small, so it's easy to bounce around from state to state. But I do recall when, just being a teenager, the whole drug war issue really struck a chord with me. And drug testing did too. This was when the idea of student drug testing was really in its formative stages, not like now where this is a policy that's actually funded by the government. But you know, at that time it was just something people were beginning to talk about. I was incredibly offended by the idea that there could be policymakers out there who would expect me and at the time, you know, my classmates to pass a urine test. This is in the 1980s. So I think those two issues, they were passionate with me, they were offensive to me, I thought they were a real infringement on civil liberties, and the reason I ended up hooking up with NORML to focus on the marijuana issue specifically was, from a pragmatic standpoint, I thought it was the easiest to win. I really, at the time, I think underestimated how much our culture and society is ingrained in prohibition of marijuana. How much of the battle we're facing today is actually, in many ways, still a reaction to the culture wars of the 1960s. Because if this, it's not an ideological war. It's actually a war that we're fighting that's not based on science. It's not based on ideas. It's based on more intangibles. It's based on this idea that somehow if you smoke marijuana you're an immoral person. It's based on this notion, this false notion, that if you believe marijuana laws should be liberalized, somehow you don't support the family values that this country was founded on. I was unaware of that at the time. Not having been in Washington, not having been nearly as politically active, I really thought that this was an issue that just hadn't been explained properly, and that were I to do that, these laws would change. And unfortunately, I have found out that there's a lot more going on than simply making people aware of the evidence.
And what have you found is going on?
Well, as I said, it's politically, this is a very uphill battle, particularly when you're talking about at the federal level. In some ways, that shouldn't be surprising. You know, the federal government's usually slow to react. In fact, they were slow to react to a marijuana prohibition. People tend to talk about the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 being what criminalized marijuana in this country. What they actually leave out is the fact that every state had already made marijuana illegal prior to 1937. The federal government only did it after the fact. And unfortunately, I think the federal government, when it comes to the issue of legalizing medical marijuana or decriminalizing and or legalizing marijuana for personal use, once again, they will be the last to act. They will follow the state's lead. And fortunately, we do find a much more receptive audience at the state and local level than we find at the federal level. It's frustrating being in Washington because you're so close to the federal government, but I would encourage people who get involved with this issue that if you want to try and enact change, begin at your local level, your county level, and then work your way up to the state, where we have had, within state legislatures, quite a bit of success. And you do not run into as often sort of these more rhetorical battles that you see in Washington, where unfortunately everything is about message, and it's very rarely about substance.
Right. Well, I mean, there's certain, if NORML is looked at as a lobby, if you will, for marijuana, for decriminalizing marijuana, or marijuana for medical use, marijuana for recreation or spiritual use, marijuana as hemp for commercial agricultural use. As a lobbying group, it seems to me like that you're going up against the pharmaceutical industry, the alcohol industry. I mean, the first one's a multi-billion-dollar, then the alcohol industry. Then there's the military-industrial complex, or just the whole police thing. There's so many police who wouldn't have jobs, or judges, if they weren't putting all these marijuana users.
There is a whole economy that thrives on prohibition, and certainly not just the prohibition of marijuana, but really the prohibition of marijuana is sort of the foundation for prohibition in general, because as we know, almost half of all the drug arrests in this country are for marijuana. Well, not all those people go to jail. You do not have these law enforcement officers on the streets, and you do not have the budgets that continue to pay for the number of law enforcement officers that we have currently, unless you have these large number of marijuana arrests, which, according to the FBI that releases this data annually, have now topped over 750,000. Actually, the highest number we've ever had in this country's history in one year was recorded in the most recent year we have data for, which I believe was now 2004, because the FBI is always about a year and a half behind. When it comes to lobbying, it's interesting that you bring up the points you made. It's actually not that black and white. There is one group that you can count on to inevitably be there to lobby against you, and that is the representatives from prisons and law enforcement. And I don't care if the issue is reclassifying marijuana with low THC content as hemp so it can be grown commercially, or whether it is exempting serious ill patients who have a recommendation to use marijuana from their doctor, or if we're simply talking about the adult personal possession and use of marijuana. Whatever the issue, however it's framed, law enforcement will be there to oppose it. And they're a very strong lobby group, in some states stronger than others. In California, the Prison Guards Union and law enforcement is incredibly strong. The California Narcotics Officers Association, up until about 1 year ago, were continuing to say publicly that they would seize marijuana from authorized patients. This was 9 years after the law had passed in California. The